Hello, everyone, and welcome to this latest edition of the Indica Books Writers Workshop with Otis. We do this on a fairly regular basis every Sunday at roughly this time, which is 8 p.m. India time. So the intent is to help aspiring, growing, budding writers to get feedback on the craft and to ask questions and get some finer points of writing clarified. How it works is that you send in a roughly 800 to 1,000 word submission to Otis well in advance so that he can have time to go through it, review it, critique it, and send it back to you. And then when we meet on Sunday, we go through that piece, all of us. You can obviously ask questions on Otis's feedback and comments. And the intent is for all of us to take a look at each other's writings and learn, appreciate, criticize, and get our doubts and other things clarified. We put this recording up on YouTube, so you can go back at least 80, 81 sessions that we've had so far, and you can watch all of those recordings. And without further ado, Otis, I will turn this over to you.
Okay, thank you. We had a piece from someone I wasn't familiar with, Deepa. And
yes, Deepa is here as an attendee. Deepa, I will make you a panelist so you can also join the stream. And if you don't have any objections, it'd be great if you can switch on your video. So I've just clicked to make you a panelist.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, how are you?
Hey, thank you. Apologies, like I said, I'm heading to a class. I'm in the car, so I will have to not turn on video right now. So let's go with the audio, and I will try to go back and, catch up the video later. So apologies for that.
Oh, okay.
But I did, Otis, I did look at the feedback that you turned in. So I do recall it very vividly.
Oh, okay, good. Let me let's start with your work since you have somewhere else to be, and then we also have Sricharan and Pranshu to talk about. So there. What I usually do is I have people read a little bit of their piece so that we can all become a little bit familiar with it. And I'm going to screen share your piece so that others can see it. So with this piece, actually, and also Pranshu, this is relevant to you. I had some similar feelings. So, and I actually have a little lecture that I've worked up that I'll have to do. It's going to be, it'll be visual, so I don't know how useful it is for you. And I definitely don't want anyone having a car accident because of their writing class. Writing is important, but we have to, keep it reasonable. So as I read this piece is for an anthology. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Fundamentally,
and tell us a little bit about the piece. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is. It's fundamentally a retelling about a very, very small incident in a Purana. I'm sure, Otis, by now you're familiar with some of the works of people like Pranshu and many others who we kind of take these very ancient legends and we try to retell it in a kind of, somewhat thrilling, racy, and try to like draw out some of the symbolism. So this is a very, very, there's a big work called Lalitopakyana, which is in one of the Puranas. And there is a very small incident about a little girl who's actually divine. All of these are, I noticed your comment about how can a 9-year-old be on a battlefield. but that's really, we're talking about gods and goddesses here. So that's kind of the context where there's a young daughter of the goddess, Lalita Tripura Sundari. She is, kind of not being included in the war. She's a trained soldier, but obviously she's young and she's not being included in the war. But she, seeing the opposing guy, right, the opposing army, that guy sends his sons to fight. So now this daughter of the goddess feels, if those sons are coming, I'm the right person to go fight with him. So she demands, and she's frustrated because she has to watch the war and not be part of it. And then she kind of argues with her mother and her commanders that she wants to go fight the war, and she goes fights the war, and she wins, right? And this is a very, very small incident, but it has a very big significance in two levels. One level is this young goddess is actually worshipped very intently. There's a whole number of people who actually follow this goddess as a first step to this worship. So she has a very big Bala Tripura Sundari that's like a big, kind of a following. So on level significant. On the second, there is also symbolism that she's an easy way to reach reach the goddess. And the 30 sons are actually hurdles, and so there is a symbolism behind it. Of course, I don't want to be too pedantic in the story, right? It is a story, and I don't want to be like a preachy, I don't want to make it too preachy. So that's kind of the context, and it's a very, kind of fascinating story. So that's kind of a context that I think is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think when I began reading this piece, so there's some things that are just common, and I think we see these issues a lot, and some of them might be explained by the fact that I'm not as familiar with your culture as the readership that you anticipate. But I think that I would actually like to. I would like to not have that be an easy answer, for my issues of confusion. Issues of confusion, I've been doing writing in a workshop setting since the 90s. So I've had more school and more writing workshops than you can imagine. And one of the issues that we always see in writing workshops, in the ones that I've taken and the ones that I've taught, and I think one of the greatest struggles for us as a writer is to write to use words so that the reader experiences something with clarity. I mean, this is just our problem, because we're using words to create, as I say, like a verisimilitude, right, of the world. And we know that in our lives and living our lives that we can have experiences which seem very clear and focused and even intensely interesting to us. And we can also have experiences that are confusing, chaotic, and therefore and chaotic to the degree that they don't feel good, right? And we can also have experiences that are so mundane that they are boring, and those also don't feel good. This is going to be, I did some drawings, and I'm going to go through this later, and you may not still be able to be part of it, but you can watch it on video because we take those. But so as I see it, we have kind of two poles. One pole is confusion, or a continuum, right? One pole is confusion and the other is boredom. And we're on a continuum between those two things. And what we want to seek, basically, when we write, is we want to get to this sweet spot in the middle where we have the greatest amount of clarity, but also the greatest amount of excitement, and reader interest. If you play sports, you might recognize this sort of central place as something that they call the zone. So if you've had the experience of playing sports and you've gone into the zone, that's when you're absolutely completely engaged with your experience, right? I mean, there can be, if you're playing basketball or something, or whatever sport, right? You know, there's a lot going on around you, but everything is clear. And suddenly the fog, you know, drops away and you have this clarity and intense engagement that doesn't feel bad. It doesn't feel desperate. It just feels, I mean, it just feels great, actually. This is the thing that we're trying to reach, this place in our writing. And in my experience, this is our first greatest challenge, to use our words, right? So I really want to be clear about this. We use our words to bring the reader into this place of clarity. Our clarity, you know, our clarity, our interest is not the issue. I want to like kind of say that again, you know, like that we're clear about our ideas, that we're clear about the nature of the characters, that we're clear about how they look, how they act, why they act the way they do, et cetera, that we're deeply fascinated with what these characters are doing and what the ideas represent to us, all of this. And I'm not talking about this piece specifically, I'm talking about all the pieces I've read in my entire life and all the pieces I've written also. My interest and engagement is kind of a given. That's the thing that's motivating me to write the words down on a page to start with. But what matters is our ability to use our words to create this place of intense, clear engagement from our reader, and to put the words on the page that will make that happen. That is the thing that we create, that zone. We can think of it as creating the zone for the reader that will keep them absolutely engaged in our work and do the one thing that we aspire to do. I've said this many times, we cannot control whether a person opens our book or not, but as soon as they open it and read the first word, we have control over them. And we do not want them to close our book or stop reading. So we want to keep them in this place of intense engagement continuously with every single word. So back to the beginning here. I've done this myself. I mean, I'm telling you, I've not even done it just once. I still do it, and I do it many times, no matter, whenever I talk about all this stuff for everyone, I want just everyone should know that I basically have come up with all this language to describe all of these things because I do all of these things, and I'm trying to remind myself. And even my teaching is trying to remind me again and again, because we have an instinct, we are fascinated with our ideas, we are clear about what we want to do, we are motivated with our purpose, and it is hard for us in the sort of the fog of our great motivation to realize that our reader is not going to necessarily be with us. But I call this front loading, basically. Front loading. It's when we pack everything into the beginning because we feel like the reader needs to know all this stuff in order to carry on with the story. And I'm not, when I tell you I do it, I'm really not joking. I mean, I do it again and again. Most of us, all of us writers, you'll find we often rewrite the beginning over and over. But gosh, usually we could just cut it off. You know, I've seen in workshops so many times people write, you know, a 15-page story, and then, you know, the professor, some sage, you know, person with incredible wisdom will say, well, why don't you start on page 7? You know, and they're right. Start on page 7. You know, start in the middle of the action. Start when the character is in that moment of engagement, right? When the character enters the zone, when they're doing their thing, in relationship to the conflicts that they're facing. That is the intense experience that our reader knows and the one that they identify with. So there are a lot of names here. There obviously, there's different characters. There's, there is the chaos of warfare, and the chaos of warfare, and even the chaos of being in a battle or the chaos of being in a fight, right? That is naturally very confusing. So we have a lot of our work cut out for us to create a clear experience if we're starting in a battlefield. So those are some things to start with. You have a 9-year-old child who you described. So now I'm going to go to a second thing. So I'm gonna say this as if it's a truism, and I really encourage other people to weigh in. Abhinav, I would love to hear from you on this. You have a character who you're saying is a divinity, and so the child, a 9-year-old, we're just told that she's a 9-year-old girl, but really, in fact, she isn't. She's a divinity. I think that what the reader wants to do, right? They want to be in this state of clarity. They want to be engaged. But what they also want to do and I'm going to say on a spiritual level, maybe, is they want to identify with the protagonist of the story, and they want to be able to participate in the character's struggle. And that way, we as readers on the outside of the story, we get to learn, because, let me back up a little bit. We all learn through our experiences. But with the introduction of writing and writing technology, and even before that, when people were just telling oral stories, it was possible for people to learn not just with experiences, but with hearing about experiences and being drawn into experiences. And I think that this is something that the reader deeply wants. If the character and the protagonist is not like them, right? If they're not humanized, if the reader cannot find a place of connection with them and identify with them, then they're not able to really participate in the experiences of that person. So this is something we have to work out. I mean, writers, I'm going to say, we love to take on problems. So I believe it is a truism to say that the writer wants to identify with the protagonist. And I also believe it's a truism that the reader, that the reader wants to identify with the protagonist, and that the reader cannot identify with the protagonist if the protagonist is completely unlike them. They might be different in the specifics of their lives, but they should have some commonality and universality in some central place, right? Writing about divinities is divinities, and this is also superheroes, and this is all the sort of superhuman, the people who are kind of removed and up above humanity. There's a difficulty in writing about all of those archetypes for the writer, I will say. And I've witnessed this throughout my entire writing career, and it might be simply because a divinity doesn't truly struggle with life and death. I mean, maybe that's the way to say it. Whereas human beings, the thing that's common for all human beings, regardless of their specific circumstances, throughout the entire world, is that we all know this central thing that I say to all writers: we want to write about struggle. And what is that struggle? the struggle is between the protagonist and the antagonist, but that struggle is always, and I don't like symbols, so take this with a grain of salt, but it speaks to the struggle of life. It speaks to the struggle of the individual versus the world, in a sense, which is a struggle of, again, I don't really like life and death so much because, I don't know, these things are somewhat mutable, but it's the human struggle of individual versus the world versus the environment. And when we write about the superhuman, the divinity, and I felt this way about Superman, right? So in comics, right, they have Superman. The most uninteresting hero of them all seems to me to be Superman. He's infinitely powerful, or anything that's infinitely powerful. He has no struggle. But even Superman has kryptonite, right? So the writers of the comic books and that superhero recognize the need to humanize the superhero so that the reader can identify. And so Superman will have an arch nemesis and can be challenged and can even be hurt. Can he be destroyed or not? We're not certain, but he certainly can be injured and hurt. And that becomes a struggle then of life and death, and that's something that the reader can identify with. I guess that's deep, but that's already a lot, probably. But I throw that out as maybe the challenge to figure out how can you have the best of all worlds? How can you both? This is the perennial struggle for us as writers. How can we do what we want, but also engage our reader by creating an experience that they want? Abhinav, do you have a comment on this before you drink your coffee?
Yes. So while I tried to read the piece while you were talking, Otis, I haven't read it completely, but some general comments based on all the sessions that we have had over the last year and a half, and the pieces people have submitted, the pieces I've submitted, the feedback that you have given, and all. So some things that stand out both in a general and a specific sense are, firstly, that the too many characters in the beginning tend to confuse the reader, and they don't know which character to focus on. So that is one point. The second one is the use of adverbs. There's no rule that says you cannot use any adverbs, but by and large, strong verbs are preferred to adverbs. So that's the second thing. The third one is the show don't tell. Right? Again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but again, to the extent that the writer can show an emotion rather than tell the reader about it, I think the impact is that much greater. Obviously, the flip side of that is that you don't want the show part to overwhelm the entire narrative, right? You don't want line after line after line of showing. One example that comes to mind out here are in the very first line, and then in the first line of the second paragraph. For a few seconds, she distractedly watched Mantrini. Right. So distractedly, how was she distracted? How do I know she was distracted? Was she fidgeting her fingers? Was she looking, left and right? Was she, how was she distracted? The second one was Bala was too vexed to watch. I don't know what vexed is, right? So these are some of the things that struck me. Obviously, every writer brings their own style, but as a reader, the things that tend to resonate with me as a reader are when I have more of show, less of tell, strong verbs, sort of a very fixed, focused narrative and all. So yeah.
Yeah, and let me also, as you were talking, Abhinav, I'm not for us, these are some issues. These are kind of writing issues. We talk about, not confusing the reader and not boring the reader, right? That's, and although it has a deeper significance because we want to figure out how are we engaging the reader. The same thing goes for, this aspect of writing about a divinity who doesn't share the reader's human struggle. Therefore, the reader has difficulty connecting to that character and identifying with them and identifying and caring about finally their struggle because they don't really understand it. Or maybe there isn't one at all anyway. And so we need to figure out how to get that on the page. So that all goes back to this one thing. The other thing, though, that I think is, pretty important, and I think I found this over the course of a long period of time with, working with Indic and writers who are writing from, traditional stories, is that sometimes it seems that writers, the Indic writers, want to cover the material sort of as it's been covered. But we as writers, I'm going to just put that aside for a second. I'm making hand gestures that I think are very important, Deepa, that you might be missing. So I'm moving my hands from one side to the other.
I'm sorry, I am parked now, so I am watching what you're saying.
So okay, yeah. Okay, thank you, because I try and make this fairly theatrical. You notice I keep my hands in the frame in order to, make it more interesting, visually interesting for everyone. But I think one of the issues, and you're making me look at this, and this is it's a great place for us all to come because I really want to help you bring these stories to life and engage readers with them. But I talked about the human struggle, but the other thing that human beings all share in common is relationships with other people. And I had a mentor who I often bring up in these Indic things, Bill Harrison, who said, I would have rather cut off my hands at my wrist than write this paragraph. So he could be quite cutting at times, and I was very thankful it wasn't my paragraph, but he said, his number one rule was write about relationships. And I think what that ends up meaning is that relationships, well, there is the drama of life and death. And if we imagine in the movies, we can have the guy is flying solo over the Yukon and then his plane fails and he parachutes down and now he's battling against waterfalls and grizzly bears and doing all that. And that's fine, right? That's fine. But it isn't really the kind of life struggle that most of us are familiar with. The kind of life struggle most of us are familiar with are the life struggles of relationship. And in this story, the relationship is between a mother and a daughter. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we say, well, they're divinities who are not governed by human emotion and human whatever we want to say. I don't think we're served when we do that. I think we'd be better served to say, this is about a mother-daughter relationship, and I'm going to focus on that. That's the dramatic importance of this story that we as a writer might take out of the traditional story and focus on and breathe a greater life into in order to make it engaging for our reader and to bring this traditional tale, to make it relevant for a modern audience and hook them. So I think, what happens now in this piece, you do cover a lot of, let's say, probably the facts as they're depicted in the original story, and even some of the symbolism. And I'm going to say that I don't think the facts or the symbolism are really as important to the reader as the relationship, which every single person on earth knows the intense relationship of child and mother. Right, Deepa? Mm-hmm. And so that can be something you can really draw out of this piece. And I would make that more central than, for example, it's like, well, those sons are fighting in the war, I should fight in the war too. well, that's maybe a political point to make, and maybe it's a feminist point to make, or something like that, and that might be important, but I still think that that's on a more superficial level than really digging into the dramatic circumstance of personal relationships.
Mhm. So I appreciate it a lot, and I'm trying to like digest. Some of what you said are quite profound. So there's certain things around the writing style itself. Like I'll come to that, and Abhinav had some feedback about that as well. But the challenge I faced is really like you said, right? If you go to the last line of this thing, right? So there's basically a whole worship kind of a tradition. I'm trying to avoid using the Indic words on that, but there's a whole tradition, and literally, like I said, the only line, and then there's a whole, kind of a worship tradition. There's a whole, what do you say, a hymn around it. It's called the Lalita Sahasranama. So for people who are familiar with that tradition, I mean, all the names and all of those characters and all of that make a difference, right? Like, wow, this is something I chant every day. Like I chant about Gya Chakra Ratharuda, Mantrini Parisevita, all of that. So it makes a big connection. But that's the very, very narrow audience. But the story is quite familiar. People are familiar with Lalita Tripura Sundari and all of that. But to your point, Otis, about there are kind of two meta kind of high level I would say like narratives or key, key main points out there. One is, like you said, the relationship. The story ends, and that is really the powerful line which actually made me write the story, is the God. It's just one line, but it's very sweet and powerful for those who are in that tradition. It is that Lalita Tripura Sundari, the goddess, she is very happy when she sees her daughters, Slady, sons of the enemy, right? So that is just one line in that whole tradition. And I quote that later in the last page. I kind of bring out some of those key lines which I'm trying to elaborate on. That is the one line, right? The defining line is the goddess is very happy when she sees her young daughter go and slay these demons, right? Now, that spawns off a whole kind of a narrative around a young girl who actually is not being allowed to fight, so she feels she's ready, she's not allowed to ride. From a human level, that is something all of us relate to. All children relate to, definitely. My children always says, you don't allow me to do that. I'm capable of it. You don't want me to do that. When we all take up our new jobs, right? Like we have to watch our managers do it, and we are not being allowed to like lead or contribute enough. So there's a certain human element where everybody's saying you're not ready. You're kind of too young, too immature, too unprepared to participate in it, and there's a protagonist actually wants to do it. So that is that whole line which I wanted to convey, with the Bala being like, everybody's fighting. There's this fantastic battles going on between her mother's commanders and everybody else, whereas she is just put in this chariot and she has to like kind of warm the seats there. She has to watch, and she's getting fidgety, and I'm trying to convey, maybe not well enough, but like she's holding her sword and she's touching her bow and she's like fidgeting. She watches all these fantastic combats, but she feels frustrated that she's not able to participate in it. Finally, she works up the courage to go and talk to her mother, but her mother is kind of like, she's distracted and all of that. And then it is when the sons of the enemy march in that Bala feels this is the right time for me to speak up and find a place in the battle. So that is that whole stream, that kind of, where I wanted to focus on. And I'm not drawing out I'm it's in my mind, but I'm not drawing out the fact that this is something all of us face, where we are not allowed to kind of play a role because we are considered not ready.
Yeah. So, well, let me break in a little bit. So this is getting for me, though, some of this is returning back to the distance between what's being depicted in this story and what you're seeking to emphasize and the way you emphasize it, and my connection with the experience. I don't know how much, how familiar you are with violence, but this is not realistic to me. I mean, I'm sorry, I just have to, at a certain point, I have to say, like, the child, you're idealizing these figures, but I don't think you're really empathizing with their experience right now. And maybe you can maybe you can separate yourself by saying, well, they're a divine experience and I'm reading it from scripture and I'm just depicting what I've learned in turn. But I think that you have to reach in and try and humanize these characters. I think that a child, myself, when I'm a child, it says, oh, I should be allowed to do something. You know what? I also have a feeling of being very unsure about doing it. Also, I have to, this is almost a personal thing for me, because I do write about military quite a bit, and I write about life and death. I don't think that we're as callous to violence and unaffected by it as is depicted here. This is actually a pretty deep issue for me. I think that I don't know. I could. There's an amusing story. Maybe I'll go to this amusing story instead, as opposed to my rather serious take on it, because this has actually formed a great deal of my work, and it's central to my work, that we treat violence, both violence and love and affection, truthfully, that we write truly about it, not based on some sense of idealism. And by idealism, I don't necessarily mean a good way or a bad way. I just mean in terms of an idea of it rather than the actuality of it as it's lived. But I knew this writer named Barry Hannah. He was a Southern writer. He's dead now, and he was quite a character, a very colorful character. And he was in a workshop once, and someone had written a story, and in the story there was a character who had a gun pulled on him, and the writer had written, he pulled a gun on me and pointed it at my head. I felt nothing. Right? That's what the writer wrote. And I understand why the writer wrote that, I think, because this is a guy who's, young, and he thinks he's tough, and he thinks he's, above, human emotion in a sense. He's so callous and capable, like a Hollywood movie star, which I also object to, those depictions of human beings who are callous to the brutality that they engage in with others. So the next week, Barry Hannah came into the workshop, and he took a gun out of his bag and pointed it at this young man. And he said, "Tell me you feel nothing." That's a point that I want to make here. You have a child who's witnessing carnage and mayhem, and even killing other people. You have a mother who's witnessing that slaughter of someone else's sons, and you're saying that she's simply enjoying it. I don't think so. I think our feelings are more complicated than that.
Yeah, but this is the classic, like good versus evil kind of a battle. I mean, it's that would be kind of denying most of our wars, right? Like many of our Puranas are filled with these kind of very, very pretty gory battles, and I mean, that's kind of how it is, right? Like I can't change that. There's the whole thing is about thousands of. I mean, the scale is like a grand scale of huge evil that's being combated by the goddess and her, kind of her soldiers, right? So yes, it is very gory, and it is, definitely a lot of, carnage there, a lot of magic.
I'm just saying, I'm just putting it to you as a problem to be solved, right? So I don't have a dog in the fight, as they say.
No, I understand.
I'm just saying that, so I'm a reader who wants to connect with the humanity of the characters I'm reading about. And if they're not depicted as human, as I understand humans, as I understand myself, I know that my feelings about violence that's done to me, about violence that I've done to others, that I might go on to do, is extremely complicated. I know that my feelings about, my children, and harm coming to my children is complicated. And I know that the idea of other people's children being harmed is exceptionally complicated. So we see the reader knows themselves. We are going to be depicting something about the interior self of whatever character we treat. If we treat that interior one-dimensionally, then there's no point of connection between our reader and those characters that we're putting on the page. I'm not classing it against, the tradition or not the tradition. This guy writing a character who, the stock Hollywood masculine hero who feels nothing about slaughtering thousands of people. It doesn't matter to me who it is. I'm just saying that the thing that we want to achieve is this connection between the reader and the writer, right? We want to achieve this bridge in the story, and that means that we have to do certain things in the story to make that possible. This is our problem that we have to deal with. And so if we have, I can't answer the problem for anyone. I'm just saying that we have to deal with it. I have to deal with it too. I want to write stories about my own callous heroism, and I want to write the story about people pointing guns at me and I feel nothing. I just simply masculinely handle the problem with maximum efficaciousness. But that's not a realistic character, and everyone was like, Otis, that story is terrible, and it's not true.
May I
suggest have to write true stories?
Yeah, Deepa, so that is exactly like, what you're quoting is exactly what is there. But you see, you basically qualified the opponents of Bala Tripura Sundari as sons of Bhandasur, right? Sons of somebody. Don't classify them as sons of, name them, and basically tell them that they are also evil, right? You basically have to also inform why, deaths of somebody, these evil characters is necessary. But you have to basically also inform. For example, in Mahabharata, right? 18 days, huge carnage and everything. The sons of Kauravas are never mentioned specifically that, ABC kills sons of Kaurav. It's just later on informed. But when they are very, whenever any of the villains, or you could say one of the losing side, whatever you want to say, the villains are named, they are named as such. And then they are basically defeated and killed in the battlefield by the people on the good side. So it is basically their necessary deaths are literally, transcribed there. So, same thing here. You can.
Pranshu, can I interrupt? I'm interrupting a little bit because you are in your advice steering away from what I'm trying to lead to, which is okay. Yes, I mean, at the end of the day, all of you as writers and me as a writer, we're all going to make our choices, and we're going to do things, as we see fit. I know the things that guide me when I'm writing. I would use as an example something like World War II. So in American culture, we have World War II. We have the Nazis who were absolutely evil, and we have American soldiers who were then fighting on the side of good. It doesn't mean that it wasn't complex and difficult and painful for those soldiers, for American soldiers, to kill Nazis, right? I mean, so post-traumatic stress disorder, as it is called, right? This is just a psychological name for basically the way human beings feel when they engage in interspecies conflict, right? I worked at the the Menlo Hospital volunteering with PTSD people, and there were people there from World War II. Even if someone thinks they didn't feel something, and this is going back to the Barry Hannah story, this character he might think that he doesn't feel anything, but it's not true, is what Barry Hannah is saying. And the writer, and what Barry Hannah is trying to teach this kid, albeit by some questionable methods, is that you as the writer, you could write a character who thinks he didn't feel anything, but you have to know that the character did feel it, right? Even, well, let's leave it at that. And I think we probably just need to digest this and carry on with it. The writer's life is a life of struggling with these ideas. That's what I'm going to say. I have struggled with these ideas my entire life, and I've applied myself to them. Ernest Hemingway, people feel different ways about him. I think he's, overvalued for some things and undervalued for others. But he said, write one true sentence. So let's try and do that. Write that one true sentence. If you're talking about, taking these stories, try, if they seem, there's something to be said about how this is being depicted. I mean, even, for me, if I go back to for a few seconds, she distractedly watched her mother's minister masterfully combat somebody. Like, I don't think we distractedly watch, scenes of violence in which we're in peril. I never have. I mean, so yes, Abhinav.
Quick time check, Otis.
Yeah. But I think, so, but I think the things I'm telling you, I really like your passionate engagement with this. And so this is going back to what I said in the beginning. We are coming to our work with a certain motivation. I am coming to my work with a motivation. I don't always like what I'm required to do in order to actually engage with my reader, to do these issues of identification. When I started writing, I wanted to write stories, endless stories about my own victimization and heroism. Okay, so that was basically my topic, right? People were not as interested in that as I thought they would be, not at all. So I had to deal with what did they want to be reading about? How was this going to be relevant, affect and engage their lives? And then also do that with clarity and without confusion. And those have been basically the parameters that have led me over the course of 30, 40 years to the place I am now. I mean, this is the struggle, right, that I've been engaged in, and it simply is that. And I can see that you're taking it on. You are motivated to write about these characters. You can write, and the sentences are wonderful, and you're painting the scene, and you're giving it your attention. And I know that you're going to be able to grapple with this other aspect. And it doesn't mean that we're going to come out with something that's perfect at the end of the day, but we're going to be on a process. I mean, I've never written anything perfect in my life. So we're going to be able to write the thing from the place that we are now. And then we should write it, and we should finish it and do it as best we can. And then we should send it out and publish it. And then we should write the next thing. So I think you're well on your way, and you're certainly well on your way since you gave it to me, right? And you know that I'm going to say something, right? So you're clearly interested in something. You didn't say, "Oh, I don't want to hear anything about this. I just want to publish it." You're like, "Okay, I do want to hear something from this, obnoxious American from Oregon."
No. I know. That's, I mean, obviously, like you said, I mean, I've been sitting on this for over a year now. It's gone through like a dozen iterations. Mainly, the crux hasn't changed because, I mean, to some extent, I have a certain bias because I'm a worshipper in this tradition. So that is like, I will never question the goddesses. Why she's violent or why she's fighting, and I'll never question that because that's kind of my tradition, right? So I'm not going to do that, but I want to, like you, to your point, humanize and find out the conflict. But I know in light of time, there's just one question which I was grappling with, and I probably see that struggle here is, the conflict, the kind of is happening on the battlefield, right? So the young girl is kind of like she wants to, wants to be part of the battle. That's happening. However, for the reader who's not familiar, I do need to go back and paint like what happened, like how did this, what was the turn of events that came up to this battle, and why was this girl born, and so I'm struggling with that. I started chronologically first. My first drafts were more chronological. I started with what happened, and the Devas came and requested the goddess to help them fight the evil, and the goddess did this, and so it was kind of like what you see in the later part of this page. I started there, and then I built up to the birth of Bala, who's like the protagonist, and then how she develops, and finally so it was chronological, but I found it was not as, and especially considering it's a short story. So I would like some help, because now what's happening, as you see, is I start in the battlefield showing her conflict, then I go back to that entire past, and then I have to come back to the thing. So I was struggling with that, and I wanted
this is actually going back to, so if we feel like we need to explain things to the reader, we're on the wrong track. Everyone, I'm going to encourage everyone, and I include myself here, be simple. Tell a simple emotional story. We often say begin in media res. It's Greek or Latin for in the middle of the action, right? We want to begin in the middle of the action, but we want to engage with what is the dramatic story that we're writing. You're making a point about the carnage and the tradition and that's also partially why I said maybe put that aside. I would try not to depict it with a lot of bias, but I would just try and put it aside if you can, and concentrate on the drama of the daughter and mother, the struggle between the daughter and the mother, and make that as human and relatable as you possibly can. Make that the dramatic action. Since if that's the dramatic action, all the explanation about the war and all of that stuff is not the point of the story, right? Write about relationships is what Bill told me, or else he was going to cut off his wrists, cut off his hands at the wrist. So I say that we focus on that. That is my best advice for you. Let's not, if we're in the business of explaining stuff, then we should be writing something else, not narrative. We're writing narrative, then let's write a story, and we want to tell a story. And you know what? Stories have worked for centuries because they just unfold. They begin and they unfold. They've been working for centuries. Let's not explain anything. Then we're writing analysis, we're writing history, we're writing not, who knows what, but let's not, unless that's what we want to write, and then we'll write something else, but we won't offer the reader, we won't bang the pot and say, here's a story, come and get it, and then feed them a bunch of exposition. So that's my dramatic flair. I better move on. But
okay,
Deepa,
thank you.
I really appreciate this work, and I appreciate you giving it to me. And I find this conversation intense, and I'm going to tell you, I have this intense conversation with myself very, very often. It is really our struggle to deal with this. But this is what we want to do as writers. We just want to obsessively try to answer these problems that we have between what motivates us, what we want to do, and what that pesky reader on the other side wants to engage in. It's maddening.
Thank you so much, Otis. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'll give it a lot of thought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deepa. Sritran, let's look at your work. What was that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Sritran, since you, let's read some of this.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to go over the thing, but I will lower this down for you if you don't have it available, but if you could read the beginning.
Up to that line? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll lower it when we get there.
Yeah, okay. I closed my eyes and jumped. My feet left the wall and floated in emptiness that sucked me in, but only for a brief moment. I opened my eyes and I was lying on my back on a mound of wet sand. Get up, soft head. It was the pirate who spoke first. It is only a fall. I could make out his shape faintly, but other than that, I only heard his voice in the dark. Are you free? I said. Even the air felt like it was cooler and lighter than inside the walls of the prison. Not yet. We are only past the gates of hell. Now we must cross the Styx to get our freedom, the doctor said, his right hand pointing to his left. I forgot about the sea. I remembered gazing at the blue vastness from the terrace of the warden's tower and despairing that I must have to die behind those walls. The sea was black now, darkened further by the moonless light. With our plan to cut the power off inside the prison, we were almost blind. Is that the boat? I pointed my finger at a rectangular outline I could see at the shoreline right ahead of me. It had been swaying for a while now, moving back and forth along with the white foam. I was not sure at first whether there was a thing there, but gradually the ship coalesced into a solid frame. Can you go down a bit?
Yeah.
Okay. It is, the pirate said, and took a step toward the boat. I helped myself from the sand and followed him. I looked back to the giant wall, reminiscing the torturous moments within its boundaries. It loomed like a giant curtain, marking the boundaries of hell on earth. I had worked every minute in the day and almost half of each night, ate the shitty food that stank of piss, and hosted all sorts of worms. I had been beaten like a dog for the past 3 years of my life, just for forgery. Yeah,
Okay.
it is completed.
Yeah, great. So tell us a little bit about this work. What are you going for?
Yeah, I am writing a short horror story. So it also has supernatural elements. You already said you don't like that sort, but I'm going for it.
I like it if I
So
can
this is about
understand it.
three
I like
prisoners
everything I can
escaping.
understand.
Okay. Okay. So it is about three prisoners who plan to escape from a prison, and they directly fall into the trap of a demon or devil or an evil entity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
is the
one thing we
crux.
notice, when we write something that's supernatural, when we write science fiction, when we write comic figures, or those superhuman figures, that
Yes.
we basically, whenever we read them, there's always rules, and those rules are actually a kind of human rules. Like the human rules still exist. Like, why is there a ghost? Because a person died. Why is that ghost there? Because they're haunting this place. It's like the ghost had a violent death in this, in the prison, in this cell, and they haunt whoever is in, I'm just saying that there's always some set of rules that are governing the experiences, right? And it's not that the rules, sometimes today, people talk about world building, but it's not that we have to do all this world building necessarily, or maybe we have to do it, but we don't necessarily have to include it in our story, but we have to have consistent rules that are governing the experience. In Harry Potter, they play a game on brooms that fly, right? So we understand. Yeah. I mean, I don't really know Harry Potter, but it's like, okay, so one of the rules, so the rules of gravity still exist, right? There's not no gravity for everything, and we can't understand them. How are people standing on the ground? We have rules of the brooms can fly, right? So, Superman, is affected by kryptonite, and Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is Spider-Man because he got bitten by a radioactive spider. Like, that makes sense. It doesn't have to actually make sense, but it makes narrative sense. There's a narrative sense to what's going on. So anyway, I'm just sort of responding to, like, I don't like supernatural. It's not that I don't like supernatural. I mean, I read Turn of the Screw by Henry James when I was a kid, and I love that. It's not that I don't like science fiction. I, loved Ray Bradbury when I was a kid. And it's not that I don't love horror, even though I did not like Christine by what's his face when I was a kid. what I like is good writing.
Okay.
and what's good writing is always not boring and not confusing. In the middle, that is good writing. So
Okay.
it's clear and it's necessarily complex, tense, and engaging.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Sricharan, one thing I really admire about your work is that you dive right into it, and I think that we know that your real issue is to follow through with a single piece and get it done, and then send it out for publication.
Yeah, you have been saying this for a long time as well.
Oh, really? How long? How long ago?
I don't know.
Yeah. So there comes a time for a writer where they have to stop writing the first 4 pages of a story. I'm going to tell you, writing the first 4 pages of a story is amazingly fun. I love it. And I've written the first 4 pages of many stories, but I have not finished all those stories. There's a certain point in a writer's life where they have to bear down. They have to say, they have to write it from beginning to end. They have to be able to look at it, even though it's a total mess, and say, you know what, there is a good story there, and this is worth all of my time and effort to make it good enough to publish. Then they have to just bear down on it and have this other level of experience, the other level of a committed experience to a story, to become the best writer that we possibly can, so that we do honor to the story that we're writing. That's why we do it. You know, I did not become, I'm trying to be like I'm some great writer, but I didn't work as hard as I worked to become a good writer because I simply wanted to be lauded by, you know, the community of at large, right? I worked this hard to become a good writer because I had a good story to tell, and I needed to tell it well in order for it to be heard. That's why I did it. That's the place you're at. I enjoyed this, but I was somewhat confused. You have a lot of, you know, you have characters. The only thing I get of this character in the beginning is that he's soft head. You know, he gets called soft head. I like that. But I don't know why I care about what he's doing. I'm not even 100% clear about what he's doing. Like, what does he want? I see that he wants to get out of the prison, but he's accomplished that. The other thing that happens here is you have a lot of different references to things. So you have a pirate, and I'm like, is this like a pirate archetype, or is this a real character? I don't know who I'm dealing with. Are they archetypes? Are they superficial stock characters that are just, you know, a forger and a pirate? And is there going to be a knife thrower and a poker player? You know, is this basically the A team is forming? So I want to know what world I'm being involved in, so that I know whether I want to give my time to your work or not. Like right now, for me as a reader, I'm not going to want to give my time to this work. If I'm reading through this, I'm going to put it aside because these characters are not developed. I don't see how I relate to them. So it actually is, it's similar to what we were talking about in Deepa's work. You know, I don't identify with these characters, and I don't care about their struggle. If I don't care about their struggle, I'm going to go to another character where I do, and I feel like I'm going to learn something from it. The other thing here is that when we have references to the pirate, we have a reference to gates of hell, we must cross the river Styx. I'm like, do they? How am I supposed to understand those words when they're being used? Is the river Styx actually here? Is it not here? Is this person actually a pirate? Like, you know, what time period is this even? You know, is it like, Sritran, I am going to spare you my pirate's voice, I think, throughout this entire discussion, but I want to use it. Do you know what a pirate's favorite letter is?
I don't know.
Pirates love the sea,
Okay.
but
Okay. Yeah, I got that joke.
yeah. But I think that their favorite, I think it goes, their favorite one is "Arr!" Anyway, I'm not gonna bore you with my pirates. So, yeah, I mean, I'm confused here. You're going backwards and forwards in time.
Mm.
You know, you jumped out of the prison, but then we talk about the prison. Why are we talking about the prison? Keep going forward. Start the story someplace. Start here. You started here on purpose, and then you go forward. This is very common for us when we first draft things. These are the things that you would fix if you worked on your story, but you first have to finish your story. Then finish the story from A to B all the way through. Look at it. Is this a story to devote the next 3 months to? My first big publication, I worked on for a year. It was 15 pages long. But that work paid off. Both people read that story and it launched my career, you know? So knowing that you have a good story that's worth telling, that's dramatic, that's going to grab and engage people, that's the first thing that we're trying to get. And we got to tell it all the way through because it's the whole thing that's the story, not just the first 4 pages.
Yeah, okay.
So this story needs unraveling. It needs a bunch of things. I could tell you all those things, but I'm not sure amongst the 12 to 14 different stories I've read of yours right now, what story you want to commit to. So giving you comments on this one, it seems like I give comments on it and that makes you put it away. Well, you know what? There's probably got to be a story here that you got to write all the way through, and don't take any of my comments. Write all the way through it because you want to write it. Have that experience and then look at it and say, is this a story I want to devote 3 months to a year to so that it's so good that no one can put it down? That was my standard with my work, and it worked. My standard was, if someone opens this story and reads the first line, they are not going to put it down. I'm not saying that no one put it down, but I'm saying that that was my aspiration.
Yeah, I understand. Yes, so I am committing to this one actually. So I thought to send some more pieces on this story, complete story itself, for some weeks.
Okay.
So
do you have this story completely done?
I did not completely write it yet, but I am writing. Some of later part is done. I'm going.
Okay.
I'm to write other pieces.
Well, Sri Charan, if you keep this story below, which by God do, keep it below. Let's give you a word count. Shoot for 3,500 words. As a short story. 5,000 words is too long.
No, I think 3,500 is too short, probably.
Well, you know the saying. Some writer said, "Sorry for the long letter. I didn't have time to write you a shorter one."
Okay.
So there is something to be said about writing something that's short and sweet rather than long and not.
I mean, shouldn't we take some time to, as you pointed out already, establish the characters? Or so if I feel 3,500 is too short for this particular one.
There's a word that we use in writing. We call it economy.
Okay.
Economy. So we don't spend time establishing characters. That's development. That's development. If we need to establish characters, write that somewhere else, and figure out who these characters are. When our character gets on the page, they are whoever they are. We don't need to establish them. All right. When I walk into a room, I don't need to establish my character. I am my character, aren't I? So we do the same thing with our character. We walk them into the room, media race. They are the character. Have them be the character, and then have them deal with their next. The story is about a character the protagonist arrives in a situation in which they're confronted by forces of antagonism. This explores the character. It doesn't establish the character. So let's have them come in. They're fully formed from the first sentence, from the first word. They are completely fully formed. I'm not unformulated day to day. I'm fully formed, but I'm coming in and I'm meeting a force of antagonism. Now we're going to explore my character. And the exploration of character is, I want something, the character wants, but the story is about what are they willing to do to get it, right? That the character wants is a given, so we need to know that they want something, and then we need to see what they're willing to do to get it. And how do we discover that through the course of the story? By them not getting it. As my father said, try and fail, try and fail. It was a little bit depressing to grow up with that, but that's what he said. Sritran, I would love to see this whole story. What I'm getting to is I'd love to see this whole story, but I do not want to be abused by too many words.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to shorten it as much as possible. But let's see. Maybe I'll do a big draft and then cut out some stuff from that.
Exactly. But what we often do is, so like, you know, we want our scenes to be really, you know, punchy. We want our dialogue to work on a couple different levels. Everything we do, we're not trying to do something complicated. We're not trying to do something intellectual, but we're trying to really distill the right experiences. You know, we're trying to have the telling detail. We're trying to have dialogue that really represents the character and advances the story. These are all things that we want to do. The more time, this is something I learned early on, and thank God I understood. The first story I wrote was really not very good, but you know what? It was short. Okay, so it was okay. It wasn't very good, but it was short. If it was longer, it would have to be better. So I was only capable of writing something that was only so-so. So I made it short. I wasn't taking up, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours, a day and a half of my reader's time. Because if I took up a day and a half of my reader's time and I gave them as little as I had in that story, they would be mad at me, right? They would have hated me, and they never would have read me again. So I have to balance, what am I doing? How significant is it going to be for the reader? How relevant to them is it going to be? And the length. Bring those two together. The idea that your reader just has infinite time that they want to squander on your work, that is not a route to success, I do not think.
Okay, got it, understood.
Well, we'll see if it is or not.
I mean, I'm trying to keep it as short as possible.
But that's not what you were saying a second ago. But so write it, you know, keep it. I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter. You do not want that. You do not want that to be the beginning of your story. When I open it up and it's 40 pages and I'm just going to get like nothing out of it, you know, I'm not going to be, you know, I'm not going to laugh and cry and be wrung dry by my experience and see the world in a completely new way. If that doesn't happen to me, do not take up my time.
Yes, I agree.
Wonderful, Sritran. I always enjoy your work.
Yeah, thanks, Otis.
Vandana. Vandana, are you here?
Yes, I am there.
Hey, you want to tell us a little bit about your story, and then we gotta move on. We're taking I'm taking up a lot of time. Let's see, 7:30, 8:30. Okay. Tell us a little bit about this piece.
This piece is about a little girl. This is about, again, a little girl. She is very much attached to her grandparents than her parents. because it is her grandparents with whom she has grown up, and her parents were very busy, so she had grown up with her grandparents. And now with the sudden demise of her grandfather, she's not very she's attached to her grandfather very much as compared to her grandmother. But with the sudden demise of her grandfather, she's very she's very upset, and she cannot understand exactly the meaning of death, and so she's very upset. And then she's not as friendly with her grandmother, though her grandmother wants, but she's not. And now when she has grown up, her grandmother has even died. That's it. It's just a gist.
Okay. Yeah, great. Can you read this first page for us?
Yeah, sure. Ma, please tell Baba I miss him. With these words, she broke down. The flower-decked palanquin would carry her mother for her last journey. Ma, I love you, but I miss Baba the most. I long to hold his hands, to talk to him, to be with him. Sometimes I just keep on dreaming of him. Being with him is the best that can happen, the teary-eyed girl confessed. Ma's lifeless body lay wrapped in flowers, ready for its last journey. Tears flowed down. She wanted them both, like the good old times. But now she was alone with strangers, the two of them gone forever. The little girl clutched his fingers tightly. Baba knew she would not let him go for anything. Ma shouted from the kitchen, "You will spoil Mithali." With teary eyes she cried, "How can he? We are just going to the park and we will be back by tea time." Her granny took a back seat. She knew her husband and Mithali would not listen. Mithali would wake up with the sunlight falling on her little eyelids. The continuous ringing of the bells and chanting prayers by Ma were the first thing she would hear in the morning. Ma would complain of her getting up late, to which Baba would give a bag full of reasons. She loved them both, but Baba, as she preferred to call her grandfather, was different.
Okay, thank you very much. So in this story, at the end of it, I wrote the note that you may have to decide whether you want to write essay, like a personal essay. And I don't know whether this character is based on you or not, or whether this character is completely fictional. So because you're writing a story, and as a story, I basically am going to assume that it's fiction and that we're dealing with characters. But the mood of this piece feels more like essay because it's very reflective. It's basically sort of working with the emotions, depicting the emotions of this character in this situation. It seems like it starts in some kind of scene. Ma, please tell Baba I miss him. But I think that this is talking to the grandmother's dead. So there's some scene there and we're in some location, but we don't get any of that. But then from that point in the beginning where we start in a scene that's not really localized, we move into a backstory. In an essay, this could work. An essay and most nonfiction work works much differently than a story. In an essay, we generally create forces of protagonism and antagonism textually. That might sound a little bit complicated, but we basically present one point of view and then we present another, and we create a tension between those two things going back and forth. It might be between the present and the past, present and past, present and past, present and past. It might be between two points of view. We do various things textually in order to create a kind of tension in the piece, in the essay. In story, however, on this side, the way we create tension is that we have the forces of protagonism. Well, actually, we can say the forces of protagonism and antagonism exist in the essay, but textually, But in narrative, in stories, the protagonism and antagonism exist as characters. So we have a protagonist action, we have an antagonist action. Protagonist action, antagonist action. We go back and forth with that. That aspect is not really happening here as a story, because we do not have characters in any kind of dramatic situation in which they're acting with each other. We don't really have that the sense of protagonism and antagonism in this, if we were to think about this in an essay form either, because it's not really going back and forth. So this Vandana, this story, I don't know when, I think you got on a little bit late, so I don't know if you were here when we were talking to Deepa. Were you here in the beginning when we were talking about confusion?
No, I was sorry, I wasn't here.
Oh, it's okay, you don't have to be sorry. We all have our things to do, so never be sorry is my motto. We talked about confusion in that story in the beginning, and we will talk about it again. I don't want Pranshu to feel like he's getting away with anything. We will talk about it in Pranshu's story too. But I also talked about the other pole. So we have confusion on the one side and we have boredom on the other. And I know that, and I want us to think sort of, I want us to think about these things sort of pejoratively. We do not want boredom for our reader's experience, and we do not want confusion for our reader's experience. Neither of those experiences feel good to the reader. When we don't have a conflict that's dramatized on the page, either with characters in conflict or with kind of this textual way that we do it in essay form, if we don't have that conflict, it's basically like a kind of argument between two sides. If we don't have that, our reader is not going to be engaged because there's no struggle being depicted on the page. And Vandana, it can be difficult. And it's actually, really, there's a parallel to all of our work. You know, so with Deepa's work, with Pranshu's work, with Sri Charan's work, and with your work, and with my work, with all of our work, with Abhinav's work, we can assume, right? We have the same thing. We're motivated to write something, but we have to take into account what we need to do in order to make it relevant, vital, and engaging for the reader. How do we bring the reader into the zone? The zone is a place, so I was saying this in the beginning, and I want us to all think about this. We're trying to use language to have the reader go into this experience that's like being in the zone. And the zone is a place of maximum clarity and maximum engagement. And wow, I'll say this too, and Abhinav, see if this rings. It's a flow state, right? In sports, we call it the flow state because we're moving, we're reacting, we're engaged, we're doing everything in this state of complete involvement. And there's honestly, the times that I've had this experience, I don't know better experiences than this. I love it. This is what we're going for for our reader's experience, and we need to use words to get them there. Your story and your writing, it's exceptionally clear, but without this engagement. So if it has a fault, like Deepa's work, I would say, falls on the side of confusion. I'm confused, basically. I'm confused about, you know, there's a lot of names, but I'm also confused about how am I related to these characters? I don't understand it. They don't seem like me. They don't have the feelings that I have. They're completely unusual, and that confuses me. They're outside of the realm of my experience of humanity. So, you know, so confusion was the problem there. Sri Charan, if he's still here, he bailed already. Well, he has clarity. He has some clarity, but he also has some confusion. right? He has some engagement with dramatic characters, but he also has not intense engagement, right? So it's not, he's kind of getting it on both sides. He's doing it somewhat, but also he's clear and confusing. He's writing characters that are differentiated, but also they're not really engaged in a dramatic struggle that I'm able to feel. So he's like kind of like here in relationship to that sweet spot. Your work here, I think, is failing on the side of not engaging enough, but where it does strike so well is that I'm completely involved in the human experience of this character. Vandana, does that make some sense? Like, I don't feel distanced from this character at all. I actually feel, like, I'm like, as opposed to there was a deity who's a 9-year-old girl, like, I don't understand that character at all. She doesn't seem to have any emotion about what's happening around her. So that's not my life. My life is intensely emotional, I now realize, as opposed to when I was an adolescent. Your character, I'm recognizing as an intensely emotional character, and I am empathetically engaged with that character. However, that character is not doing anything that I can then follow as a struggle that I will be learning from. Does that make any little bit of sense, Vandana?
Yes, it does make sense, but how will I make the little the character do some work to be appreciated, to be liked by the readers?
Well, this is the issue for us. When we're a writer of stories, you have to decide whether you want to be a writer of an essay. If you want to write about an experience that's kind of a textual experience, not a dramatic experience of characters, then you want to write an essay and you want to try and focus. We're familiar with these genres, so we don't have fiction that is basically one character without that dramatic. I mean, I'm sure there's been some experimental examples of this because this is something that writers deal with. But either you want to write it as an essay, or you need to figure out what dramatic circumstance are you going to put this character into that will test her and have her come out the other side transformed, because that's what a story is. That's kind of the choice. I mean, this is, the hard work of writing is not typing words. The hard work of writing, particularly of writing fiction, is dramatizing an experience. So if you could take this, so like, let's say you looked at this girl, if I were coming up with an example, I would have this girl, say this. I mean, I don't know what the circumstances of this funeral are, but I would say, she leaves her grandmother, and I'd be like, and then what happens, right? What circumstance does she find herself in? And it's very common to have a story that works like this. So here's a girl who is bereft of basically everyone, all of her caretakers. And the way a story usually goes is like this, right? It goes down, right? So it goes, we start here, we don't start way up high, we start sort of low. There's a wonderful video that, Abhinav, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's worth putting the link up. It's Kurt Vonnegut, The Shape of Story. If you've never seen it, it's so great. He's so funny, clever, and it's true, right? It seems ridiculous how simple, but we should realize how true it is. But anyway, I'm stealing all of this from him. He says,
just pasted a link to that video.
You have it?
Yeah, just pasted a link to the video in the chat.
Yeah. But Vandana, take a look at that video, but we can think of our character. They start on their journey at a certain point, and this character is starting out pretty low. But what happens in the story is they actually go down. They go down until it gets very, very bad, and then they either rise or they don't. But we want to bring our character to a point where they're basically at a low point in their life. And what I like to do with my characters is I like to always give them a chance to triumph. I think that's the thing that we as writers, the way I think of my characters, I think of them as people who I like more than people. That's a joke. Pranchu, that's a joke. I think of them as people who I like, and I have to give them a chance. That is my obligation. I'm using them, right? I'm using my character in the story. So I'm using it to my own benefit. The thing I give in return is I must give them a chance. I must give them a chance to triumph. I can't predict whether they will triumph or not, but I have to give them the chance to do so. I know it might sound a little kooky for you all, but that's the life of a fiction writer. We believe these characters are real, if you didn't know that. So Vandana, that would be my suggestion, is to take this character and put her in a dramatic circumstance. And I do want to repeat, I know it's, so with writers, we're very much like this. All of us, we need to gauge the fact that we hear criticisms more than we hear our praises. And Vandana, I want to emphasize the praise is that I feel very empathetically attached to this character. And I think that you write sentences that really draw me into that character. However, since the character isn't doing anything, I have no struggle to engage with that makes me wonder what's going to happen, and then through that struggle to take me someplace I've never been before and to make me see the world in a different way. So that is not occurring. And one way to characterize that is that I'm simply not engaged. I'm bored from this experience, which will make me close the book. Even though I am empathetically engaged with the character, if nothing is happening, I'm still not going to, I'm not going to pursue it because I'm not going to get enough out of it. I don't get something out of simply being empathetically attached to somebody, unfortunately, maybe.
Thank you for thank you for this thing, but I really don't know how to make my characters be more engaging.
Just get them involved with an antagonist. That's usually the way. So I forget what happens. Abhinav will be able to remind us what happens in Oliver Twist. Or is it Great Expectations? What happens with Pip? Doesn't Pip meet who's the leader of all the orphans who leads them to crime? What's the name of that character?
Gosh, it was so for long back, decades back.
His brother, it's like, I think it was Oliver Twist's brother only, right?
No, Oliver Twist, he was in this orphanage, I suppose.
Yeah. But like the leader was actually related to him.
Finnegan something.
Was it Finnegan?
No, somebody like that. With a PH. No. Anyway, Vandana, so in the very beginning of our story, what we like to do, if we're really crafting a story with the greatest economy, we get the protagonist and then antagonist on the page right away. Boom. We don't wait. So, and usually because there's tension there, Vandana, that actually helps us write. So I think writers have two modes. There's this writer that wants, think of it as you're writing a movie. You're writing this, great independent film about this girl, where does she live? Where, what city is she in? What's the environment like? Where's she going to go? What's her home now that she doesn't have anybody? What is she going to do? And all of it is fascinating. And we just start telling that story. And then there's going to be, someone who's going to take advantage of her and what's she going to do, right? And then we have this other mode that's kind of a ruminative. Anyway, we think a lot, and that's a much more static space. at the end of the day, about 4 people read essays and millions of people go to stories. So we can decide what we want to spend our time on, but it has to depend on our heart, right? Do we want to ruminate, or do we want to write an action story? So you, Vandana, you will decide. But this transition, Vandana, where you are right now, this transition from having this kind of empathy with your character and then using that character in a story, that is a significant milestone, I believe, in the development of a writer. So if you feel like you're arriving at that place, then I'm going to congratulate you for arriving at that place and then taking on this next challenge, which I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying I have all the answers. I don't think I've ever said that. I think I say instead that it's going to be very difficult, and I have no answers for how you're going to cope with that struggle. But I'm going to kibitz like crazy.
I'll suggest, Vandana, watch Encanto. There's a Disney movie, Encanto. Watch that. You see, as you said, no, there has to be some antagonist. There's no real antagonist in it, but the way they structured in that movie was very nicely done. That they created that antagonist without being a real antagonist.
Well, the antagonist is the grandmother.
Yeah,
right?
Abuelita. Yeah.
It's a wonderful movie.
I'll surely watch.
Yeah. And if you want another and different kind of example, I've only started watching it on Netflix. Beef. Have you started that one, Pranshu?
Yeah, I didn't like. I mean, I you remember there was 20 years back there was a movie by not Matt Damon, the other guy, Ben Affleck, right? The similar premise. So yeah. I didn't like that one also.
I can feel it can be a little too one-dimensional. I only started watching the first part, but it's like that conflict, but it's distilling the idea of a conflict, and I think that cannot be enough too. I mean, okay, Pranshu, let's get to your work.
Yeah, so I totally agree with your beginning. You see, this is not my original beginning. Somebody reviewed and said that they want more information up front. So
Oh my God! Do not listen to those people. Do not listen to your friend. Say, I respect you, my friend, but I cannot hear you. And then hold it over your ears, and then start humming. No, don't front load. Oh, yeah, and also Abhinav said, there's no rule against adverbs. I disagree. The rule of adverbs is that the adverb is like a signpost that says weak verb ahead.
Yeah. It's I'll find something to that effect and share, but it's essentially a strong verb is always preferable to an adverb, but it's at the end of the day, you are all allowed a certain amount of mistakes, and I think one adverb in an entire book is not going to condemn it, I think.
And this adverb is gently, by the way.
Yeah.
It is not a strong adverb. I agree. Yeah, this one I shouldn't have done that change. You are right in that beginning. Yeah.
It is not the most important thing, but there's definitely a hierarchy of words. The hierarchy of words: nouns, concrete nouns, verbs, adjectives. Please be gentle with your adjectives, right? Gently go forth with your adjectives. And then adverbs are the weakest because they're describing an action, and an action is already abstract. Yeah. So how do you describe an abstraction? at least describing a noun is concrete. But anyway, this is an emphasis. This is an emphasis on something that's minute, but it is important for the much larger issue that, you know, from the beginning, we use words to create a kind of experience for the reader. Is it creating an engaging experience or is it not? And so if you take up space, even with an adverb that's describing an abstraction, is that worth your reader's time when you could have instead the ship made of teak and oak creaked as the waves rocked it?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that was the original one. Yeah, it was the rocking motion of the rock. It was basically it was the rocking motion basically, which was there earlier. Yeah. It's sort of gently.
Anyway, I don't want to, you know, go too much into. I agree with Abhinav basically that it's not a bunch of rules, but I came down so harshly about adverbs when I was in the workshop when I first started, because it was the one thing that I understood basically when I started writing. I was like, don't do that. Right. So I was like, oh, I got to hold on to this. This is my superpower. And I came down so harshly over it that I had to have no adverbs in my work from then on, because people would give me such hell if I did. And that was good. That was good practice for me. I would just look up ly and go through the entire text and then get rid of everything, because I wrote them. I just had to delete them. Pranshu, we have been working together for a long time. So you know how I generally spare everyone's feelings, and I'm so I gently criticize. Not so, my friend. We're going to get into it. Okay. So I drew a little picture of today, and this has to do with everything. I want everyone to really conceptualize this carefully. So the way I see it is we have this continuum, confusion and boredom. We have to be careful, Pranshu. If we confuse and bore, we're dead in the water. I mean, I'm just putting it in those large, vague terms. I can go through, and it's difficult, and it's even tedious for me to go through point by point and say, I'm confused here, I'm confused here, I'm confused here. You know, I don't know what's going on. I don't want to have to say that over a long period of time. I want you to grapple with it. You have to grapple with this. And what it means is that you have to grapple with this transition from, I know how passionate you are about telling these stories, and you have so much facility with language. Our strengths are not always our strengths. So most often our strengths are also our weaknesses. You clearly have a facility with language. You can produce a great deal of language. I can too. I was saying to my partner Zandi just the other day, it's like, my biggest problem is that I write too much at this point. Like 1,000 words is nothing to me. And you have a similar issue, I think. So anyway, we need to take our passion and we need to think about this reader. And the way we can understand our reader is to actually know that our reader is just like us, except for they have a passion for their lives. They're motivated to live their life. That's the difference. You're motivated because of your life experience to do this, and they're motivated because of their life experience to do something else, not your project. So, but other than that, they're exactly the same. And if you can figure out how those two go together and how they are the same and what your common factors are, then you will be writing that clear, engaging story and bringing them into the zone that you feel when you're typing, right? That's the zone they want to be in when they're reading. Right? And so the way I think of it is that there's a continuum, but I actually think about it a little bit more than that. I think that those two things actually come around and they sort of meet each other. The state of greatest confusion is also the state of greatest boredom. You know, and so when we're writing we're trying to get to this sweet spot, right? At the top, the greatest amount of clarity, the greatest amount of engagement. So we need to have, so when you have ghosts and voices in your piece, is that the greatest engagement you can get? I would say that no, because there's no skin in the game with that. Right. When we talk about an essay being, the essay is read by 4 people and the story is read by millions of people. The reason is, in a story, we dramatize the struggle with characters, and those characters are like people in that they have bodies and that they exist physically, and that means they have skin in the game, as they say. Essay is textual, and that means that there is a tension there, but it's metaphysical. There's no actual skin in the game. When you have a character who's engaged with voices in his head, there's no skin in the game, because the people that can hurt me are other people. More so, I can hurt myself a little bit, in terms of my thoughts, my negative ruminations, whatever it is. But really, it's other people that can. The relationship, right? I said to Deepa, the relationship between the mother and the daughter. Why is that a dramatic relationship? Because the daughter can hurt the mother. The daughter can say, "You don't care about me, Mom," right? And that can wound the mother. The mother can say, "Daughter, you're not ready to join this war yet," right? The mother can hurt the daughter. This is why that is a dramatic relationship. So you take
more. I was actually say I was like, I wanted to. That's one of the things I was going to play on. This guy's a survivor of the Great War, the Mahabharat War, right? So he is suffering from PTSD. So it's not really the ghost, but he's still talking to his friends as if they are still alive. And so I was trying to do a play on show don't tell. So I was not going to write as a narrator. The thing is the voices inside his construct of his mind, basically, telling, has a discussion.
Yeah, so I get that. And so that's a character, but now what is this character going to do? That's a character, but they're isolated. Where's the other character that they're going to be engaged in dramatically? I don't know when that's going to happen, and I have no promise so far that it is going to happen. I only read a couple pages in, and my worry is that it's never going to happen. So that means that all you're doing is basically creating a kind of dialectic. You're creating a dialogue that's existing in his head, and it's like going back to Socrates. It's okay, but I really want so much more than that. I want to be in this world. That world is more interesting to me than the dialogue that's taking place within it. The other thing too, this is drawing from Sri Charan's, I don't know the rules of your world. I don't know whether this guy is crazy or not crazy. I don't know when a character is in his head or actually on the boat next to him. I don't have any division between the physical world and the non-physical world, and I don't know if this character has any division.
Yeah, that I was like, because see, this was about Cambodia, right? And so their culture have this, sort of a idea of a no boundary line between physical and non-physical. So they are sort of very much akin. So I was trying to play on that, but it's not coming out, as you're right. It's probably not coming out very clearly. And there's other people also basically gave the same feedback that, they were confused that these are ghosts or the.
Right. Well, the thing is not, like what you're saying about a lack of division, that's interesting to me. But my experience has to be clear, whatever it is. So like if that's the experience you're trying to render, then I have to be clearly within that experience. But I still also need to have some kind of dramatic circumstance. So how do you manage that? See, I wouldn't tell you not to do that. I would say, though Pranshu, and I think I've said this before, For those of you who are not familiar with writing workshops, the worst word you can ever hear is that your work is ambitious. So I'm going to say, Pranshu, your work is a little ambitious right now, right? You may not have the technique and the chops really yet in terms of writing narrative stories. I believe you have the writing chops. Clearly you can write, but you don't have as much familiarity with writing narratives like this, and maybe even reading the modern narrative. And seeing movies is not always a help. They're a help in terms of story if you can deduce the story from all the other information you're getting. But the problem with movies is that movies are doing automatically so many things that you need to do in words, right? That that absolute, yeah. So the issue is one of clarity, finally, and I am not clear, and clarity comes in those transitions. It comes a lot of different places. So carrying on with this a little bit, Pranshu, these big concepts that I want you to grapple with is that, so the first thing is I want you to do whatever you can to figure out how do you get to this zone so that you have maximum clarity and maximum engagement for your reader. That is such a big task. I mean, that is the number one task, right? I was going to ask that, like when I wrote up these pictures, I was like, when do you think you have to do this? When do we have to draw out all the stops and write with this clarity in this zone? When do we have to do this? And it was a little bit of a setup because the answer is all the time. Right? It's like there's never a place to say, oh, well, now I'm going to bore the reader for a while. Oh, now I'm going to confuse the reader for a while. There's never a place to do either of those things.
Right.
So it's a pretty intense bar. We're setting a bar pretty high for ourselves because we're using these really pesky and very inadequate things called words to do it all. We don't have a lot to work with. We have to use words. We have to use grammar. We have to use sometimes repetition, sometimes he said, she said, whatever it is. We have to depict locations. We have to show what people look like. We have to remind people of things. We have to do so many things with the bar up that high. And not only just for people who are maybe a selective audience who you're like, I'm never writing for a selective audience. I am writing for everyone in the world. I want anyone in the world to pick up my story and read it. Because I know that it's only going to get in the hands of about 14 people. I don't want any of them not to read it once it does get in their hands. So we have to be in this place all the time. But then the next thing, Pranshu, is that place of clarity is not static. It has to have a movement, right? It has to have, people call it the roller coaster, but really it's up and down. Right. And I want to say up and down doesn't mean good and bad necessarily. It just means different. So we're, sometimes the way people talk about the up and the down is they talk about the A story and the B story, but they move through the A story. It comes to some point of culmination, and then we have a reversal and we start moving towards the B story, right? And then that has a point of culmination. Yeah. And then it starts moving up. And again, I want to say up and down are not good and bad. They are moments of engaged tension. And yes, it's true that the B story is a relief from the A story. So we have a release of the tension of the A story, but the B story is also tense. So like my example usually is to have Bonnie and Clyde. They're robbing banks, trying to get money in the A story, but they have a love story in the B story. It's not that this is bad. It's just a different kind of tension. So the one tension is a relief from that tension, and they work together like that, again, to create a sense of interest for the reader and to keep them engaged and to make them feel like they're going somewhere. Your story right now, I don't feel like I'm going anywhere. I have no confidence that we're going anywhere.
So I'll revert the I'll reevaluate, rephrase the beginning and everything. Get the human characters also engaged early on, basically. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
He comes into the other person he really interacts with, the hero. The other protagonist comes around the fourth page, right? So
yeah, well, I would think, there's a number of good shows that you can watch. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, was it Monk? But you have these various characters that have their own issues, right? That have I've never watched it, but I know that he's obsessive compulsive. So he has his own demons, right? He has his demons, but he also has to do something.
Yeah.
And I would think of it more like that. You have a character who has demons, but he also has to do something. Yeah. I don't know that it I saw the trailer for this movie. It's a Norwegian movie, and it seems to be it's this old Norwegian guy who is special forces or something like that, in Norwegian special forces. And then he ends up having a kind of beef with this group of Nazis, right? So I imagine that we're going to be seeing some of his demons, but he also has the current,
because in visually they can show his, like, he always touches the sides of the walls and everything as he's walking and things like that. Have you watched
it? You've seen it already?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
So okay. they're this, so because in visually you can basically you can show all that, but when you're writing, you can actually basically describe, like, as he reaches out and he just for the safe, like, secured, like a safety, like, what they call it, that like security blanket, right? He touches the walls all the time as he's walking, because so he also sort of clearing space that somebody's walking on the other side. They're not walking into his friends, his demons, right? The persons, like, he's sort of so that's but in a televisual you can show it in 1 second, that whole thing. In writing you have to work around it.
So right, well, we can do the same thing, but the basic physical process is the same. And I'm going to describe it right now, is that we have forward momentum, right? These elements of backstory can only be as long as the forward momentum is going that way. Does that make sense? They have to be equal. Right. We can't, if we have no forward momentum and we go into a backstory, then we stall. We stall. That the momentum is the engine. What's going to happen is the engine of the car. So we need to keep that going, and we can, if the car is rolling nice and fast, then yes, we can start going into a little backstory, or we can start to have the voice in the head. But the voice in the head is abstract. We have to have a balance between the two. If you don't have momentum and you simply go into the story in the head, then I'm like, well, I don't have confidence that you know what you're doing. I mean, basically, for me as a reader, I mean, I'm able to say that and articulate that because I understand these forces that exist in a story. But most readers are just going to be like, they're simply going to lose interest, because that's what it means. That's what happens. Right. They lose the interest in what's going to happen next. So, like, the time is like, the mountain lion, roared, and I ran. I turned and I ran. As I looked back, I noticed that I leapt over a cliff. Okay, cliffhanger, right? Cliffhanger. Then I say, the last time I'd run over a cliff, I was parasailing. Right. I was in Yosemite, and I had a special suit, and I was able to use the wings in order to escape, blah, 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 in order to fly through. It was the most exhilarating experience in my life. This experience was nothing like it. I had nothing, only my sweatshirt and my whatever,
Fear.
and my fanny pack, right? So I go on, and then I was like, as I began to fall, I realized my fanny pack could be ripped open, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So once I go over the cliff, I can stop and I can talk about some other things. But if I do not go over the cliff, I'm like, I looked out over the cliff at the surrounding mountains. I thought of that time when I was in Ireland and I was sitting also on mountains. No. Don't.
It's action is the forward momentum has to be there before you go into that. Yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
Ranshu, I know you will work it out. I know you will grapple with this. And it's the same as what I said to Deepa too. I mean, I know you have a passion for the project, and just keep in mind, we cannot be perfectionists. Do what you can do, but do what you can do. Be as good as you can be. You cannot be better than you're able to be, but you can be a lot worse, right? So get out of your own way. Use your mind to be reasonable, right? To realize that you need to be simple, you need to be direct. I've told this story before, but when I first tried to discover whether I could go into writing, I wrote a story. I think it was 25 single-space pages. It was an intense opus and culmination of all I'd ever learned about life. And the person, it was Barry Hanna, the person with the gun. He said to me, this meanders like a drunk on a bender. Where's the story? And I was just like, so frustrated. I just wanted to grab him and shake him, except for I guess he was armed, so I didn't, luckily. And I wanted to grab him and shake him, but I didn't. So I wrote a story that was just vindictively simple. I was like, oh yeah, you want a simple story? You're such an ignoramus that you want to read something that's just about a character who wants something. Okay, I'll do it for you. Fine. Damn you. I wrote it in, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. All out of spite and anger at this person who said who rejected my opus magnus. And he said he liked it. He recommended that I go to the MFA program that he went to, and I got in and I went there, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I got from that experience. Be simple. Don't be ambitious. Write about a character who wants something. This is, do this now. Later on, when you're the old sage with all your books underneath your belt, you can then write the most ambitious novel that no one's going to read. And I have a story about that too, but I'm going to save it for next time.
Already, yeah.
Okay, that was good one.
Yes. Good. Yes, Pranshu, we'll probably carry on this discussion on WhatsApp. I think there are a lot of good points to to ponder over and discuss and debate, especially when it comes to Puranic writing, because the pieces some of the points that Otis made are very pertinent, and then what Deepa also had to say is also very valid. So I think between the
totally
two, some sort of a middle ground has to be found that preserves the essence of those stories, but also makes it interesting to the reader. And this is something that I think a lot of us have grappled with. You don't want to distort or misrepresent an epic story, but on the other hand, the challenge has always been how to present it in a manner that someone who has read the story 100 times still wants to read it 101st time.
Again. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the case really with all stories. I mean, I over time I've begun to appreciate this more. Basically I feel like I can take almost any circumstance and write a story out of it. But when I started, I couldn't do that. You know, I had the writer draws the story out. You know, that's what they're doing. We're living stories all the time, but we don't witness them or appreciate them. And so we're kind of we amplify the dramatic element. I mean, I'll go back to, you know, whether people agree with me or not, I think that the intriguing story there is between a mother and a daughter. That might not have been in the original text because it was recording something that was historical. It's coming out of the oral tradition or what have you. So that's a story that exists, but they're not, you know, if I were rewriting the story of Helen and Troy, you know, I might think to write about it from Helen's perspective, who, you know, recognized that she was in love with Paris, but was going to leave, I think, Menelaus. And that, you know, while she might have not liked him, you know, very much, that she did feel a sense of responsibility to where she was, and that it was, you know, like that's the story that I would tell about the relationship, not about, you know, she launched 1,000 ships. I don't need to write that thing about 1,000 ships. You can go, you know, to the Iliad and read that. So, yeah, but it's a question of grappling, you know. What is it that we as the writer, what do we want to passionately tell? And then what kind of, like, I think of the reader as putting a sense of, the reader puts a sense of responsibility on me because I'm doing it, I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for the reader, right? So that makes it harder. And unfortunately, they have all the power, right? Because they can decide to read us or not. So that's good. That's good. Keeps us honest. Thank you so much for being here.
On that happy note, thank you, Otis. Thank you,
Yeah.
Pranshu, Vandana, and Madhvi for staying on. And I'll post the link to the video once it's put up on YouTube as part of the playlist. Thank you, everyone.